Hello, my spookies! It's your host and narrator Henrique Couto here, telling you that 2025 is going to bring so many new scares, so many new stories, new authors, and so much more. But of course, it's important to remember the old adage, those who do not know the past are doomed to repeat it. So I've taken it upon myself to share with you all some of the best stories of 2024. And this one I really enjoyed. It was originally a two-parter, but here we have them both married together. It's called I Used to Work in a Fire Tower with a Strange Set of Rules by Michael Kelso. So enjoy the story, make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcasting app, and I'll see you Wednesday with a brand new story. I Used to Work in a Fire Tower with a Strange Set of Rules by Michael Kelso. It wasn't all that long ago when I worked as a park ranger in a fire tower. You'd think it would be an easy job. You'd be wrong. Once I found a strange list of rules, it was all downhill from there. Suffice it to say, I was lucky to get out with my life while still being a free man. There was an investigation into the matter, and I was questioned several times by the police, but they didn't want to hear the truth of the story. That something strange and supernatural happened that night in that fire tower. Unfortunately, one of my fellow rangers wasn't so lucky. But that is another story. I never went back to that tower, ever. I searched for a few weeks before finding a new job. It was just in the nick of time because I hadn't worked as a park ranger long enough to make much money at all, and switching back and forth between peanut butter sandwiches and mac and cheese wasn't the best way to stave off starvation. But beggars can't be choosers. So I applied for this job and went into the office building in town for the interview. The first question I asked was, "Does it have any strange rules?" The interviewer looked at me like I had just sprouted a second head. "Like, what kinds of rules?" she said. "I don't know. Like, don't answer the phone at a certain time of night, or if you see a glowing orb, look away for 30 seconds. "Are you planning on seeing any glowing orbs inside our warehouse?" she said hesitantly. "I hope not." She held my gaze for a long moment before answering my question. I started to wonder if she was going to kick me out of her office. "To answer your original question," she said, "I don't know of any strange rules for the warehouse. To my knowledge, it's a standard night watchman job. You go there, you make sure no one breaks in and takes anything, and then you go home." That's a relief. Just out of curiosity, why did you ask about strange rules? My last job had some strange rules, and let's just say it didn't end well. "Oh, all right," she said. "I suppose that would be a good question for you to ask then." The rest of the interview was standard stuff. Thankfully, I hadn't blown it and got the job. She gave me my employee packet and the address of the warehouse. She told me I would be trained on the job, when to be there for my first shift, and the name of my supervisor, Mr. Larson. I thanked her and went on my merry way, happy to have a job that was easy and paid decently. The next couple of days went by slowly as anticipation built for my first shift. When I got in my car, the gas gauge told me I would be pushing it to make it back and forth to work before I got my first paycheck. I drove to the address and found it in what looked like an abandoned business park. There were other warehouses along the drive with weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement and up the sides of the buildings. There were streetlights, but they looked old and decrepit. Only 2 of them were still emanating their putrid yellow light, fighting a losing battle against the darkness. I came to the end of the road, and looming in front of me was a massive warehouse. The GPS on my phone told me I had arrived, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. It was all by itself, surrounded by woods on all sides except for the notch that had been cut out to make the road. I pulled around to the side where the main door was and was slightly comforted by the car that was parked in front. At least there was some other living soul out here. I got out, taking my bag of supplies with me. I started toward the door and hit the remote button to lock the car out of habit. The horn's chirp echoed through the trees, making me even more aware of their presence. I wasn't looking forward to doing security checks around the perimeter. There was only one security light that I'd seen when I drove up, and it was near the entrance. I approached the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I looked around for anything and found a keypad. I opened up my email on my phone and read the instructions I'd been sent. Your shift is from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., it read. You cannot leave between those hours. The code for the keypad is your employee code. That way we know it's you inside. I paused. There was something about that last sentence that gave me chills. I reread it and decided it was just a security thing. Your employee code is 2059. It should open any doors you need to access inside. If you have any problems, call or text the number included in your packet. I didn't remember getting any number in my packet, but maybe I'd just skimmed over it. I entered my code on the keypad. The light above the numbers turned green and I heard the lock click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. When the door shut, I heard the lock click again. I stared at it as if the sound had some finality to it. Just out of curiosity, I typed in my code on the inside keypad, but the light stayed red and the door stayed locked. I tried to shrug it off, thinking it was like a time card thing, that it wouldn't open again until 9 a.m. I looked at my watch and it read 9:02 p.m. I turned toward the inside set of doors and punched in my code. The green light and click granted me entry. If I'm going to have to type in my code at every door, it's going to be a long night, I thought. I stepped into what looked like a small reception area. There was a desk and a couple of vinyl couches along the wall. It was sparsely decorated and dimly lit. The only painting I saw on the wall had a picture of a large gate that was dark red with words in some other language. I walked through the first set of doors after inputting my code. They opened up into a long, dimly lit hallway with doors on both sides. The first one I came to said, Security. It was no surprise when I saw a keypad on the door lock. I typed in my code and opened the door. Inside, there was a desk with monitors and a computer. There was also a table with 2 chairs, another vinyl couch, a mini fridge, and a small bathroom. I set my bag down on the couch and got my water bottle out. I opened the fridge and found a lunchbox with a bottle on the door. I guess it belongs to the guard I'm supposed to relieve, I thought. Where is he anyway? I put my bottle in and closed the fridge, then looked around the room more closely. There were 3 doors on the far wall that I hadn't noticed. I opened the first one and found it was a closet. A light jacket hung there, and a small duffel bag sat on the shelf. I sat my bag beside it and closed the door. I opened the second one to find a weapons locker. 2 handguns and 2 shotguns, along with tasers and pepper spray, were locked behind a metal mesh door. I tried the door out of curiosity, but it refused to budge. Surprisingly, there wasn't a keypad to punch in numbers. It was an actual lock. I looked around for the keys but didn't find them. Maybe the other guard had them. I closed the door and tried to open the third one. It remained locked. Maybe it's a maintenance closet or something. I sat at the desk and looked at the computer. The monitor showed a login screen. I typed in my code and it came up to an email. I had 3 messages. I clicked on the first that read, First Login. I opened it and read, Welcome to your first shift. I'm sure by now you have some questions. First off, you need to log into our Wi-Fi. If you look at your phone, you'll see there's no cell service inside the building. I looked, and sure enough, my phone had no service. I followed the directions to hook up to their Wi-Fi. Once I logged in, a strange symbol flashed on my phone. Then it went blank for a whole minute. I tried to go back or go to the home screen, but nothing happened. I was about to power off when suddenly the screen came back. Everything seemed normal and I was able to do everything but make calls. My phone dinged as I received a text. Congratulations on setting up your phone on our corporate Wi-Fi. Calling will be disabled while you're on shift. If you have any needs, text this number. Someone is monitoring 24/7. I saw the number they sent and saved it as corporate. I opened the second email and read the message. Your duties. Monitor for any unusual activity. If there is unusual activity, text corporate immediately. Check to make sure all doors are secure. Do green patrols twice per shift. Do a red patrol once per shift. Do yellow patrols 4 times per shift. I was wondering what that meant when a video started showing the hallway floors that had different color stripes of paint. There was green, yellow, and red, and then there seemed to be another color beside them. Before I could make it out, the video ended. Take your breaks only in the security room. The email ended. I looked at the subject for the third one and it read, open only after the first patrol. I hovered the arrow over the subject and was tempted to click, but just then I got a text. Have you done your first patrol yet? It read. Great, I thought. Just what I need is to be nagged at work. Not yet, I texted back. Better get to it. I sighed and stepped to the door when my phone dinged. Don't forget your flashlight.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
I read it and looked at the closet, realizing I had done just that. I slowly looked back at the phone, thinking many things I'd like to respond, but texted thanks. I went to the closet and got my flashlight out of my bag. I looked at my phone and thought, anything else? Wondering if it would respond. Thankfully, it didn't. My phone literally reading my thoughts would be disturbing beyond belief. I opened the door and glanced at my phone to see if I'd done anything else wrong. It remained, thankfully, silent. I stepped back into the hallway where every third light was lit. I assumed it was the nighttime lighting, and started down the hall looking at the floor. The lines were just like in the video. The fourth line was black. I paused at the ramifications of being guided towards something they didn't want me to check on. That either meant they didn't care about it or didn't trust me to check it out. Either one was disconcerting. I decided to get a yellow patrol out of the way. I followed the line down the hall, glancing at each door that was marked with a letter and a number. The first one said A1. The next said A2. As I continued, the letter remained the same as the numbers increased. Odd numbers on the right side doors, even on the left. I reached the end of the hall, and the yellow and green lines turned right down another hallway. The red and black went left. I glanced left, but stayed right. My curiosity would have to wait until later. I followed the lines down the next hall and read the first door. It said B1. This continued down the entire hall just like the first. At the end, the green line turned left while the yellow went right. This hall started with C1. The entire time I'd been walking there was total silence. There wasn't even the sound of air conditioners or anything. It was eerie. I stopped and looked around. The hallway and all the doors were pristine. There wasn't a bit of dirt or dust. It didn't look like a warehouse, at least not like I thought the inside of a warehouse would look. This was something else. I would have to make a list of questions to ask when I got back to the security room. I continued my round and followed the yellow line as it turned right yet again. This hall started with D1. When I reached the end of the hall, the line dead-ended at a door. I hesitated for a moment before opening it into another hall. I turned and looked at the other side of the door. It said A1. I looked to the left and saw the security room. The yellow line had taken me in a circle, or I suppose it would have been a square. I shook my head, stepped into the security room, and sat down at the computer. The email sat waiting. I clicked it. Congratulations on your first patrol. I read the sentence and felt uneasy at the word successful. Why wouldn't it be successful? I thought. By now, you probably have some questions. Perhaps we can answer them before you ask. First, the black line. Do not follow it under any circumstances. Second, as I'm sure you've already noticed, you cannot leave until your shift is over. Third, make sure you close any door you open. These are some basic rules. There'll be more as your shift commences. I looked for any more emails, but there were none. Great, I thought. More rules! At least these ones aren't all weird and creepy. I opened the mini fridge and took a drink from my water bottle. As I put it back, I glanced at the lunchbox and wondered where the other guard was. I checked my watch and it was almost 10. I figured I should do my first green line patrol. I went back out into the hallway and followed the green line to the point where it veered away from the yellow. The silence in the hall was starting to bother me. Listening to my own footsteps was unnerving. The green line led to another similar corridor. This one was E Hall. I was starting to wonder just how big this place was when I heard a sound I didn't make. I slowly turned and looked back to find an open door. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it wasn't open when I went past it. I shone my flashlight around looking for anything and anyone, but nothing was there. I approached the door and was about to close it and resume my patrol when I heard the sound again. My hand hovered over the knob as my curiosity overwhelmed my fear and common sense. Instead of shutting the door and moving on, I opened it enough to look inside. The room was dark. I considered turning on the light, but instead opted to use my flashlight. I shone it around the room that looked like a lab, with plenty of workstations. I did a slow lap around the room looking for anything out of the ordinary, which was laughable because I had no idea what went on in this room or this building on a day-to-day basis. So how would I know what was normal for this place? In the middle of my lap, I noticed a dim light underneath a door at the far end of the room. I slowly approached it, turned the knob, and peeked inside. I wish I hadn't. There was a large glowing glass container that held an entity is the only thing I can think to call it. I know if I call it what I think it should be called, I'll go insane right on the spot. It was easily the size of a large human and then some. It was black and covered with what I could only describe as scales. There were sharp points sticking out of its elbows, knees, and seemingly random spots along its head and torso. Its face was a nightmare, with horns sticking out of its forehead and curling up like a ram's. It was hovering inside the container somehow, even though there was no liquid inside it, and holding its legs, making it look like it was curled up in the fetal position. I kept the flashlight down so as not to risk disturbing this thing. I panned around the room. There seemed to be controls of some sort near the container that were making occasional hissing sounds. It was as if the machine was breathing for it. How I kept from screaming and running out of the room, I don't know. Through some miracle, I kept it together and slowly backed away. I held the doorknob, turned, then slowly released it once the door was closed. I breathed a sigh of relief and started toward the door that led to the hallway. I was almost there when I heard the soft scuffle of a foot on the floor. I froze and turned back to the room, panning slowly with my light. At first, I didn't see anything, and then a tiny pale hand reached up and turned the knob that led into the monster's room. I didn't want to know what was doing it. I just wanted it to stop. After a quick rundown of potential outcomes, I settled on getting out of that room as quietly as possible. I stepped toward the hallway door while shooting furtive glances back at the other door that was slowly opening. I could see the creature in its container and the thing that had opened the door.
You're not safe yet. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
It was small, only a few feet tall, with gangly legs and arms. But what froze my blood was seeing its face. It was embedded in its torso. 2 eyes and a mouth full of sharp, grinning teeth were right there where its belly should have been. It had no head. It was like someone had smashed all but a few inches of this creature's torso and left the face right there. It looked at me, and its horrific smile grew as it reached the controls in the room. I backed out into the hallway and closed the door, quietly, then ran as I followed the green line to its ending underneath a door. I hesitated to open that door with my new knowledge that there were potentially dangerous creatures lurking behind every opening. Finally, I turned the knob and peeked out into a hallway. The first thing I saw was 4 lines on the floor, which told me I was once again in the first hall. I looked at the number on the door. It read A2. I jumped out and slammed the door shut, diving into the security room and shutting that door as well. I leaned against it for a long moment, wondering how I was going to do another patrol, knowing that either or both of those creatures would be stalking the hallways. My attention was grabbed by one of the monitors. There were over a dozen images being transmitted onto different sections of a large TV. I looked at the videos for the first time and noticed there wasn't a single camera aimed at the outside of the building. They were all inside. My breath caught in my throat. That means they aren't afraid of what's outside, but what's inside. I watched the monitors. Fortunately, they were in color. I focused on the cameras that showed green lines on the floor and waited to see if any of the doors opened. After 30 minutes, I hadn't seen any movement. I sat back in my chair feeling a little better. I decided to do another yellow patrol. I didn't want to. I would have rather stayed in the security room for the rest of my shift, but that wasn't an option. I comforted myself with the thought that I'd been watching the cameras and nothing had moved. It wasn't much comfort. I picked up my flashlight, trying to keep it steady as my shaking hands showed my hesitation. I stepped through the security room door and out into the hallway. Somehow it looked different now. Before, when I was just checking a bunch of doors, I convinced myself that nothing of interest was in any of the rooms. Now I knew better. Now I looked at each room as if it were about to spring open, and I shook the thoughts away. I had to, or I wouldn't take another step. I walked down the first hall, ears attuned to any sound. At my first turn, all I heard were my own footsteps. Even they gave me pause and had me whipping around to look behind me from time to time. By the second turn, I was beginning to feel a little less nervous. By the third turn, I was almost calm, until I saw where the green line split off from the yellow. I stopped and stared down the green hall, wondering if that thing had slipped out. For an instant, I thought I saw a movement. I shone my light all around but saw nothing. Even so, I picked up the pace for my last hallway and quickly opened the security room door, then closed it, feeling my heart racing. I looked at my watch and it was nearly midnight. I'd done 3 of my 7 patrols. My phone dinged. There was a text. "It's nearly midnight," it said. I wanted to reply sarcastically, but thought better of it. What's special about midnight? Didn't they tell you? Tell me what? The rules. My heart hammered in my chest. Not again. They told me I couldn't leave before my shift was over and to do different color patrols. That's not the rules I'm talking about. I knew it before the text came. Do I want to know what they are? I texted. You need to. What if I just sit in the security room? There wasn't an immediate text back. There are things that would happen. Like what? Like things that would destroy you, or at least your mind. I sighed. So, send me the list of rules. I shook my head in disbelief that I was doing this crap again. 1. At midnight, you must be in the security office and stay there until 12:30 a.m. No matter what you see or hear, you must stay in the office and don't open the door for any reason. That doesn't sound ominous at all, I texted. 2. When doing a patrol, if you hear someone calling to you or screaming, ignore it. Do not attempt to find the source of the sound. 3. If the doors start changing, follow the lines back to the security room. That should actually take care of you for now. Just remember, do not follow the black line, and don't go into any rooms. Are you kidding me with this? I texted. I don't want to do this again. Let me out. Sorry, not possible. Nothing can open those doors until your shift is over. And what did you mean, again? I worked in a fire tower with weird rules. Interesting. I'd like to hear that story someday. Good luck. Thanks a lot. By the way, where's the key to the weapons locker? Just in case. Didn't the guard you relieved give it to you? I haven't seen him. That's not good news. Is there a spare key somewhere? No return text came. Hello? Is there a spare key? No response. I checked my watch, and it was 12:01. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. I took a step toward it before I remembered the rules I'd been texted. The knocking became more insistent. Next, the doorknob began rattling as if someone was trying to tear it out of the door. Who's there? I said, cringing at my own words. The doorknob stopped rattling. There was a silence that was only broken by the pounding of my own heartbeat. It's Mr. Larson, a voice said. I've misplaced my key. Could you please let me in? I took another step and reached for the doorknob. When I remembered. There's a keypad on the door, I said. If you are who you say you are, just punch your code in and the door will open. There was silence on the other side of the door. It lasted so long that I wondered if whoever it was had gone away. I leaned against the door and put my ear up to it. That's when I heard the loudest, most blood-curdling, inhuman scream I'd ever heard in my life. I threw myself on the floor, trying to get away from the door as quickly as possible. The pounding continued. I wondered how long the door would hold up and what I would do when whatever it was broke it down. I held my flashlight like a baseball bat, looking all around the room for a better weapon, and not finding any. My eyes fell on the weapons locker, wishing I had a key. The door started bowing inward with every blow. It was so bad I got one of the chairs from the break table and wedged it against the doorknob. I stepped back and looked at my handiwork. The ludicrousness of a folding metal chair trying to hold off an assault that was bowing a solid door was enough to make me laugh. I knew it wouldn't last long. Sawdust was raining down on the floor. I considered locking myself in the bathroom, but saved that for a last resort. And then, suddenly, the assault stopped. The last few remnants of sawdust floated to the floor in silence. I gripped the flashlight tighter, not trusting this respite. Sweat dripped from my forehead as I waited for the assault to resume. Nothing happened. I stood there staring at the door, dumbfounded, not knowing what to do next. I glanced at my watch and it said 12:32 a.m. The text said to stay in the office from 12 to 12:30, I thought. Maybe it's okay to go out now. I grasped the doorknob and slowly turned, taking a deep, cleansing breath before pulling it open. I'm not sure what I expected to be there, but what I found was nothing. The hallway looked the same as it had before. No, wait. The lines on the floor, they were wrong. Every other time I came out of the security office, the lines stretched down the hallway to the right. Now they were going to the left. I looked to the right and saw the doors that went to the reception area and eventually the outside doors. This is impossible, I thought, my breathing becoming erratic with panic. I pulled out my phone and texted. The lines are reversed. It took a moment for the response. Did you break any rules? No, I did everything the way you said. Someone was trying to beat down the office door, but I didn't open it. Have you gone in any rooms? No, Wait. On my second round, I found an open door and went inside to check it. Not good. What did you see? Nothing, I lied. Are you sure? I didn't see anything but an empty room. Then why are the lines switched? I have no idea. You're the one who's supposed to know this stuff. Okay, do a yellow line patrol. When you get to the end, instead of going through the door the line ends at, open the first door on your right and go through it. And that'll fix things? Hopefully.
More scares to come. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
What do you mean, hopefully? No return text came. Come on, man, you've got to be kidding me with this. I texted but still got no response. I looked left, then right, then back at the security room. I sighed and turned left down the hallway following the lines. It was shortly after my first turn that I noticed a difference. The place was still silent except for my footsteps, but something felt off. It was like I was in a different place, but it looked the same. It was almost like I was walking through a replica of the warehouse, but different. Aside from the fact that I was going in the opposite direction, which defied the laws of physics because this hallway didn't exist, there was something else. I found out what it was when I stopped. My footsteps kept going. I stood there, halfway down the hall, listening to my own footsteps continue on. Without me. I looked down and my shoes were still on my feet, so that was some comfort. I stomped my shoe on the floor, but to my surprise, it made no sound. I stared at my shoes as my footsteps rounded the corner and faded. I rushed to catch up, but the sound was gone. I looked down the dimly lit hall before me and saw nothing. My nerves were getting a workout as I resumed my patrol in total silence. My shoes no longer made any sound. I tried stomping again, but nothing happened. When I turned the next corner, I was greeted by the worst sight imaginable. The little thing that had been in the room on my green patrol was standing in the middle of the hall, staring at me and smiling that disturbing grin on its belly. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind him was the black, scaly creature from the glowing container. It stood at least 8 feet high and was breathing smoke. It looked at me and extended wings I didn't know it had. They reached both walls easily. It was also smiling. Neither smile was comforting. I found my feet rooted to the floor and my knees shaking. The smaller creature made a chittering sound as it started toward me, and the larger took its first step. Its foot landed with the force of a jackhammer. The sound was debilitating. I covered my ears as they approached. I turned to run back to where I came from, but somehow, impossibly, the same creatures were approaching from that very hallway. I glanced back and forth at the mirror images of the unearthly threats closing in on me from both sides. I had no choice. I dove into the nearest door and slammed it shut. The pounding began right away. I backed away, but my foot stepped into empty air. I turned to find I was at the top step of a stairway, but only for a moment. Gravity took over and I tumbled down the stairs. Fortunately, there was a landing that kept me from falling the rest of the way. I slowly stood and made sure of my balance while looking around at my new environment. The stairs I had fallen down looked like concrete and had no railings. I glanced over the side at the darkness that seemed to go on forever. It reminded me of the Moria mine staircase in Lord of the Rings. I looked up the stairs at the door that was still under assault. then looked down the stairs that disappeared into darkness. Looking around the room, I saw no other option. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had to go in a room. Sorry, I texted. No response. Come on, don't be like that. Answer me. Nothing. I looked at the phone and it showed no Wi-Fi signal. Great, I said, hearing the word echo back to me. I sighed and started down the stairs. Fortunately, there was a landing every 30 steps or so. Each landing started the next set of stairs in a different direction. Looking down through the middle of the staircase, I could see them disappear in an elongated square. After a few landings, I found myself thinking the strangest thought. What about the rest of my rounds? The unending stairs didn't answer. As I continued down my squared circle, I found myself getting tired. More than once I stumbled and nearly rolled down the stairs, only catching myself in the nick of time to avoid falling into the abyss. I'd been walking for what felt like hours. I checked my watch and it said 2:22 a.m. I was tired and thirsty. I sat down on a step above a landing and contemplated my non-existent options. I could keep going. I leaned over and looked down at the continuing endless stairs. I could go back. I looked up at the seemingly endless stairs above me, knowing the creatures were somewhere up there, waiting. I wondered if I would be fired for not doing my patrols and if I truly cared. My first hunger pang ripped through my stomach. I know, I said, looking at my belly. The food's somewhere up there. I pointed in some random upward direction, having no idea where the security office was. Out of sheer boredom, I glanced at my now useless phone. For an instant, the Wi-Fi signal showed up, then disappeared. A bolt of hope shot through me. I texted, I got chased into a room by some creatures. I clicked send and waited. The signal stayed dead. I got a beep saying there was a text and excitedly read it, only to find it was the failed to send notification. I tried again with the same results. Over and over I kept trying to send. It was my only option other than continuing down the endless stairway. My phone dinged again, and I prepared to hit resend when a message showed up. It said, "We'll deal with the consequences later. Describe the room to me." I was so overjoyed I kept misspelling words. Dark room, endless stairway. It took 5 tries for it to send, and it was a few minutes until a response got through. Okay, do nothing. Set your phone down and lay perfectly still for 5 minutes. I didn't bother to try repeatedly sending okay. I lay on the platform, I set my phone beside me, and I closed my eyes. I counted out 5 minutes, very slowly, just to be sure I didn't end early. When I opened them, I gasped. I was laying on the floor in the middle of a square room. The pattern on the floor looked like the endless staircase. I stood and walked over to the door. I reached for the doorknob and opened the door very slowly. The hallway appeared to be empty. I stepped tentatively out into the hall and started back following the yellow line. I hoped I was going in the right direction. At the end of the hall, the line turned left. The green line separated off to the right and I stayed with the yellow. One more turn and the yellow line dead-ended at a door. I reached for the knob, then remembered and turned to the right. Opening that door, I peeked through and saw the security room across the hall. I lunged for it and dove back into the relative safety of the office. I went straight to the fridge and grabbed my water bottle, then opened the closet and pulled out my sandwich. I lay on the couch and chugged half the bottle while inhaling my sandwich. It wasn't long until I was asleep. I woke to the sound of my phone dinging. I read the text. "Are you still with us?"
Did you hear that? Better check the locks on your doors. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Yes, thanks to you, I texted. Take a break before you do any more patrols. Way ahead of you. And don't break any more rules. I'll do my absolute best, trust me. A couple more rules. Really? If you see any more creatures, don't go in a room. Stand on the line and be still. As long as you're on the line, you'll survive. Can they hurt me? Next rule. Yes? The next text didn't come. I set down my phone and set a timer for an hour. I thought he would text the rest by then. I woke an hour later to my phone's alarm. But no text. I tried again and waited but got no response. What do I do now? I looked at my watch and it said 3:47 a.m. Okay, let's evaluate, I said, sitting at the desk in front of the cameras and computer. I have a little over 5 hours left until I can leave this madhouse. I've done 1 green patrol and 3 yellows, so I have 1 each of red, yellow, and green to do yet. There's some kind of monstrous creature roaming the hallways with his deformed sidekick, and I still don't know where the other guard and the keys to the weapon locker are. The laws of reality seem to be subjective and depend greatly on whether or not I open any doors on my patrol. Somehow, I decided to do another patrol. I was more worried that the building itself wouldn't let me out on time if I didn't do all my patrols. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if that was what happened to the guard I was supposed to relieve. If he was sitting on some endless staircase trapped forever because he missed 1 patrol. It wasn't a comforting thought. At this point, it was all that kept me from laying on the couch and sleeping the rest of my shift away. I took another drink and went to the bathroom, then stuck my phone in my pocket, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out the door. When I looked down, I was surprised to see the lines going to the right. Maybe I reset things when I reset the room, I thought. I headed down the hallway, hearing my footsteps once again. I stopped, and the sound of my footsteps stopped as well. It was a comforting return to some normalcy. As I made the first turn, I paused and peeked around the corner to see if any creatures were waiting for me. The hallway seemed empty. I looked at the doors to make sure none were cracked open, waiting for me to pass. They all seemed closed. I was glad I hadn't run across the creatures, but every step I took made me wonder if they were lying in wait for me at the next turn, silently waiting to jump out and do unspeakable things to me. I glanced down at the lines where the red and black went left and the green and yellow went right. There was something on the floor. I bent down and shone my flashlight to get a closer look. There was a small drop of something red. I touched it with my finger, and it smeared on the floor. Whatever it was wasn't dry yet. It hadn't been there long. I brought my finger up to my nose and smelled it. It had a metallic scent. My eyes went wide with the realization. It was blood. I jumped up and looked all around, searching the floor for where it came from. The yellow and green hallway looked clean, but the red and black hallway... I saw another drop 3 feet down the hall. I shone my flashlight at the yellow and green, longing to do a quiet patrol. Then I looked over at the red and black lines that were punctuated with drops of blood every few feet. I sighed and turned left, following the blood and the foreboding red and black lines. My senses went on high alert. I could hear my breathing. I could smell my perspiration as my stress level rose. Every step sounded louder than the one before. Even the doors seemed to somehow menace me. When a light in the ceiling flickered, I froze. Nothing jumped out of a room and dragged me to hell. I paused and took a deep, cleansing breath, then continued my patrol, keeping an eye on the blood on the floor. I came to another turn and checked carefully before stepping into the new hallway. The problem was, it was a fork. The red line went right, and the black line went left. The blood followed the black line. I thought back to the repeated warnings not to follow the black line. I remembered being trapped for hours when I disobeyed a rule and went into a room. I stood there at the fork looking at each line in turn, back and forth. It came down to a choice. Obey the rules, follow the red line and play it safe. Disobey the rules, follow the blood, and see if the other guard is hurt. One choice was selfless and the other was selfish. Another thought pushed to the front of the line. I've already broken the rules. True, I was trapped on the stairway to hell for a while and wasn't sure if I'd make it out, but I did. This thought tipped the scales, and I stepped off the red line and onto the black one. The moment I did, I felt a chill. I looked around, but nothing else seemed different. I kept following the trail of blood when the hall got darker. I looked up, and every third light was still lit. It was like something was snuffing out the lights. The chill got more intense to the point where I could see my breath. The doors in this hall were fewer and farther apart, and there were no turns. I looked at the doors to try to figure out how far I'd gone, when I noticed they were blank. I shone my light at a half-dozen doors. Not one of them had a letter, number, or any markings on it. I decided my selflessness had reached its limit. I turned and started back towards the fork where the red line was. I walked for 5 minutes, and the red line was still nowhere in sight. In fact, the chill hadn't gone away either. The drops of blood were still there, though. I broke into a light jog for a few minutes, which soon became a flat-out run. After a few more minutes, I stopped to catch my breath. That's impossible, I thought, realizing even as I thought it, that I had already seen impossible things tonight. Once I was breathing normally again, I decided to break out of this loop. I reached for one of the doors, but it was locked. I tried another, and another. All locked. I pulled out my phone and texted. I'm stuck again. We told you not to follow the black line, the return text said. It sent chills down my spine. How did you know I was following the black line? I only said I was in trouble. We know exactly what you're doing the entire time you've been in the building. Then why didn't you tell me not to follow the black line? We did. You ignored it. So, what do I do now? A single word came back, making me wish I'd never come to this place. Die. As I was still staring at the 3 horrid letters on my phone, I heard a noise behind me. It was just the shuffle of a foot, and I knew I wasn't moving. I looked up, and there stood the hideous creature with no head and its face on its belly. It was staring at me and grinning. I turned to escape the other way, but the massive, scaly creature was standing there, blocking my path. They had me boxed in, and none of the doors would open. I was out of options. The only thing I could think of was the text that told me to stay on the line. I stepped away from the door and out to the middle of the hallway and stood on the black line. As they approached, I could see smiles on each of their grotesque faces. The big one was flexing its claws, and the small one's arms were outstretched as if wanting to give me a hug. But I knew better. They had me, and they knew it. With nothing to lose, I ran towards the smaller one, and right before I got to him, I swung my flashlight with everything I had. It smacked him right in the teeth. I dove over his falling body as he crumpled to the floor. I kept running as hope sprung up in my chest and fueled my escape. It was short-lived as I heard massive wings flapping behind me, and the next thing I knew, claws grabbed my shoulders, tearing through my uniform and into my sides. I tried to escape its grasp, but its grip was like iron. I stumbled and fell to the floor with the weight of that thing landing on top of me. I felt and heard pops in my back as pain raced down my spine. It matched the pain in my face as my skull bounced off the concrete floor on impact. I knew instantly my nose was broken. It released its grasp so its claws could stand on the floor, but it still kept me pinned down. I heard it cackling as it relished in my helplessness. I felt hot liquid run down my back that I hoped wasn't my blood. I tried to break free and squirm my way out of its grip, but it was too strong, and all I ended up doing was causing myself more pain. I felt its claws tearing at my back, ripping cloth and skin.
Are you afraid? Good. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
There was nothing I could do. It was digging into my spine. Once there, I was just a piece of meat. Whoever had texted me was right. I was about to die. The rules had finally been my undoing. There was a flash of light and an explosion from behind me. I felt the pressure release as the creature's weight lifted off of me. I wondered at this new development, feeling grateful but cautious as I painfully rolled to my side and attempted to get up. I got as far as my knees when I felt and then heard a presence. I looked, and there stood a man with a uniform on similar to mine, only not as destroyed. He was older than me and looked like he had been through a rough time as well. He had several scratches on his cheek and his uniform was ripped in several places. He also had a bandage on his hand that was red and dripping. I tried to get to my feet but struggled. He helped me up and we stared at each other for a moment. "Mr. Larson, I presume?" I said finally. He looked surprised when I said his name. "Do I know you?" he said. "I'm your new trainee. I just started tonight." "What are you doing out here on the black line?" I saw the blood and followed it to make sure someone was all right. He looked at his hand. "Yeah, got into a bit of a scrap," he said. "We should probably head back before Ugly decides to show up again." "I agree," I said, starting to walk away, but my left leg didn't want to cooperate. I started to fall, but he caught me. "You all right there, son?" "My leg seems to be having a bit of a problem." He grabbed my arm and pulled it over his shoulder. "Let's get you back to the security office and take a look at that." We started back down the hall and within a few minutes came to see the fork where the red line split off. I was never so glad to see anything in my life as that line of paint on the floor. We started to turn back towards the yellow and green lines, but I stopped. "Do you mind if we do a red line patrol?" I said. He looked at me puzzled. "I'd rather have someone with me anyways, and we do have to go all the way back." "Sure thing, kid," he said. We kept going straight on the red line. The farther we went, the more my back seemed to hurt. "Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" I said to keep my mind off the pain. "Shoot." "What is this place?" "Well, now you asked one hell of a question to start out with," he said. "It's hard to explain. Let's just say it's a form of a testing facility." "Testing what?" He seemed to struggle with that for a moment and was silent as we walked. "Testing all sorts of things. Obviously, you've seen some of the more incredible subjects, but there are also simpler tests going on." "Like what?" "Mostly dealing with reactions, how different subjects deal with stimuli." "How do you know so much about this place?" He chuckled. "When you've been here as long as I have, you learn things." Just then a door burst open and 3 ugly troll-looking creatures lumbered toward us. He stopped and tapped his watch, then fiddled with controls for a moment as the trolls advanced on us. Suddenly there was a wave of light, and they froze in place right as they were reaching us. I looked from him to the trolls and back. "That's a handy gadget you have," I said. When do I get one of those? He smiled. Can you keep a secret? Sure. I'm technically not supposed to have it, but I find it makes patrols a lot easier. Nice. Maybe I could borrow it once in a while. If you don't quit after tonight, he said. That's a mighty big if, I said, feeling the pain getting worse. We continued past the frozen trolls until the red line dead-ended at a door. I reached for it, but he pulled me back. I'm guessing you didn't get all the rules yet. Apparently not. He touched his watch, and a light shone from it onto the door. It had a red X on it. He shone it on the door beside it, and it also showed a red X. The third door showed a green circle. It's this one, he said, opening the door and helping me through it. To my surprise, we came out in the main hallway. I looked at the number on the door and it said A5. We walked down to the security room and I reached for the number pad to enter my code. I stopped and withdrew my hand. Why don't you enter the code? I said. What? Because I'm holding you up so you don't collapse. I painfully reached over and leaned against the wall. I'm good. Go ahead. He looked at me for a very long moment. This isn't a very polite way to treat someone who helped you out. No, it isn't, but I'd still like to see you enter your code. He glared at me with fiery intensity. Is this the way you're going to treat your superiors? Not if they really are my superiors. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to see you punch in your employee code to show me you are who you say you are. Who else would I be? I don't know. Let's find out. He stood there, looking every bit like he wanted to deck me, and then suddenly his expression softened. Good job, kid, he said, then faded away to nothingness. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and punched in my code. The door opened and I found myself once again looking at this room as my place of refuge. I limped into the bathroom and painfully peeled off what was left of my shirt. I wetted some paper towels and tried to pat down the gouges and scrapes on my back. I looked in the mirror at my broken nose and patted it with wet paper towels to get as much of the dried blood as possible. I wasn't looking forward to getting it set, if I ever got out of here alive, that is. As I stepped out of the bathroom, something was different about the room. The weapons locker was open. I stepped over to it and found the metal door hanging, wide open. There was a shotgun and a handgun missing. I didn't want to think about the ramifications of someone being in what should have been the most secure room in the building. Not only that, but taking weapons as well. And the fact that they thought there was enough danger to need the weapons in the first place. I'll admit it would have been nice to have the shotgun on the last patrol, but I grabbed a shotgun and loaded it, then threw some extra rounds in my pants pocket. Then I took a holster and put it on my belt, loading a handgun to put in it. I grabbed a taser and pepper spray as well. It was strange, but being armed didn't make me feel more secure. Maybe it was the fact that I had no idea who had the other guns. I hoped it was my supervisor, but this place had taught me to expect the unexpected. The other difference in the room was the locked door that I had assumed was a maintenance closet. It was open. I chambered around in the shotgun and peeked around the corner into the open door. It was dark. I was tempted to close the door and walk away, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I turned on the shotgun's flashlight and started through the door. I jumped as my phone dinged, saying I had a text. "Don't go in that room," it read. I stuck the phone in my pocket and continued into the room. The light wasn't much help against the total darkness. I could only see a few feet in front of me. The passageway was cramped. I had to walk a little sideways. Claustrophobia crept up on me and had me fighting off panic as I continued down the tiny corridor. The light from the shotgun didn't do much to stave off the darkness. There was little to see, but it would have been nicer to see it much more brightly. Suddenly, the corridor opened up into a large room. I made sure there weren't any steps to stumble down like before. I flashed the light around but didn't see much. The room was empty except for something small in the corner. I cautiously started towards it, shooting glances all around as I went. When I got close, I could see it was a small box. There were bars on the front of the small door and fingers were sticking out. "Hello?" said a raspy voice, barely loud enough to hear. "Who are you?"
Shh, it was only the wind. You're safe. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
"My name is Kevin Larson. Who are you, and why aren't you wearing a shirt?" I looked down, and sure enough, I forgot to put my shirt back on when I was tending to my wounds. "That's not important. I need to get you out of here." "You can't. They're waiting for someone to rescue me so they can capture them. I'm nothing more than bait." "And I fell for it," I said, looking at the lock that prevented his escape. "Go back and report that I'm missing," the other security guard said. "I did that several hours ago." "And they haven't sent anyone?" "Unless they're invisible, which, for this place, that might not be much of a stretch." "Who are you again?" "I started last night. I'm your new trainee." "You say you started last night?" "Yes." "And you called in that I was missing?" "Yes." "You're not my trainee. You're my replacement." "What do you mean?" "If they haven't come looking for me yet, that means they think I'm gone." Wow. Talk about job security. I kept fiddling with the lock, but it refused to open. "Step back," I said. "What are you going to—" I fired the shotgun at the lock. It hit, but didn't break it. "Stop!" he yelled as I chambered and fired another round. This time the lock broke and came free. I opened the door in time to receive a punch to the jaw. "You idiot! You could have killed me!" He came out of the box and wrapped his hands around my neck. "Get off me!" I yelled, twisting out of his grip. He knocked me to the floor and we rolled around, trading punches. "You're welcome, asshole," I said. "For what? Trying to give me a buckshot milkshake?" I stopped rolling when I heard the sound. It was like a rushing wind coming toward us. "What is that?" I said. He jumped up and ran toward the corridor. "What is it?" I said to his rapidly disappearing back as I ran as best I could behind him. It didn't take long for me to find out. The large creature I'd met last in the back hallway must have had a lot of family because they were all flying toward me. I kicked into high adrenaline gear, running faster than my injured body wanted to. The wave of black wings was almost on me. I turned around long enough to fire a shot at the closest one. I was rewarded by seeing him not only fall, but take a couple of his brothers with him. Encouraged, I fired again, watching 3 more go down. I fired again and again, feeling like I could take them on as I squeezed into the corridor. I aimed one more time, but the gun only clicked. I had fired my last shot and needed to reload. The problem was, I was running backward in a corridor that had no room, and my arms were nearly pinned to my sides. I started hacking at them with the butt of the gun when they got close enough. It wasn't as effective as a buckshot blast, but it still worked. They were almost on me. I felt claws scratch at my head and face. Suddenly I fell backward, onto the floor of the security room. "Help me!" Larson said as he tried to slam the door shut. I had the wind knocked out of me. I stumbled to get up and rolled over to press my weight against the door. They were still holding it open enough that it wouldn't latch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a shotgun shell. I loaded it and stuck the barrel into the opening. Before I could do anything, it was nearly ripped out of my hands. By some miracle, my finger was already on the trigger. It went off, knocking them back just enough to close the door. He collapsed beside me, breathing hard, and offered his hand. "Now I'll thank you for the rescue." "You're welcome," I said, sitting there, trying to catch my breath. "Not to sound ungrateful, but how did you get in there anyway?" I pointed my thumb over my shoulder. Door was open. He fixed a hard stare at me. That's impossible. I shrugged. I don't know what to tell you. I walked in after my last patrol. The door was open and so was the weapons locker. Was anything missing? He said, suddenly alarmed. A shotgun and a handgun. He grabbed my arm and yanked. We have to go, right now. Why? The word was barely out of my mouth when the floor erupted beside me. I jumped up and followed him toward the door. A shotgun blast hit the wall behind me. A chunk of the door blasted out in front of us just before we reached it, causing us to duck. Who the hell's doing that? I said. Oh, come on, a voice said from the other side of the room. You've forgotten your rescuer already? I glanced around the corner and saw the fake Larson aiming a shot at my head. I ducked back just in time as the blast tore a hole in the wall. Does this kind of thing happen often on night shift? I said, loading more shells into my shotgun. Only when you break the rules, he said, fixing me with a pointed glare. If I would have known this place had all these freaky rules, I never would have taken the job. Neither would anyone else, he said, peeking around the corner and being rewarded with a shotgun blast nearly hitting him in the face. I don't get it, I said. All these rules are stupid. Maybe we could discuss it when we're safe. I fired off a blast when I saw fake Larson peek around the corner. And when will that be? I shouted over the return shot. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for something. He grabbed the shotgun from me and fired. The buckshot pierced the fire extinguisher, instantly filling the room with a cloud of white powder. He grabbed me and dragged me toward the door as the other Larson fired blindly. We fell into the hallway, barely staying upright, coughing powder out of our lungs. I turned and slammed the door shut. Will that hold him? I said. How many more patrols do you have to do? He said, looking at his watch. Are you nuts? Why would I do any more patrols with that psycho running around? Believe me, he said, looking me in the eyes. There are worse things than him in this place. I thought for a moment. I still need to do 1 yellow and 1 green. Do you have any more shells for this thing? I felt in my pocket and pulled out 2 more shotgun shells, then handed them over. I pulled out the handgun and chambered around, then turned on the safety. Let's go, he said, heading down the hallway.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
I was still shirtless and feeling the effects of the attack in the black hall, but I did my best to hide the pain and let the adrenaline carry me along. We walked side by side, each alert for anything that might pop out at us. Surprisingly, we made it all the way through a yellow patrol without a problem. I looked at my watch as we emerged back into the main hall near the security room. 8:11, I said. We better get that last patrol in quick. The first hallway was no problem. When we turned the corner, however, my large, scaly friend made an appearance. I didn't even hesitate. I shot him in the torso, then in the head. He screamed an inhuman shriek and ran the other way. His little buddy took one look at me pointing the gun at him and followed suit. Larson grinned and nodded at me. When he turned the second corner, I couldn't believe my eyes. The floor was suddenly made of lava. You've got to be kidding me, I said. Okay, I know it looks bad, but stay single file, and whatever you do, stay on the line. He started walking, keeping his feet on the line like a tightrope walker. I followed after him. The heat from the floor was tremendous. I was sweating buckets and didn't even want to think about the consequences of toppling over without a shirt on. We continued as quickly as possible, looking every bit like 2 kids trying to walk the yellow curb on a sidewalk. Right in the middle, I stumbled and lost my balance. I stepped 1 foot into the lava to regain my balance and was instantly rewarded with pain. I screamed in shock and agony. It felt like my foot was literally on fire. I got it back on the line, sucking wind through my teeth, trying to stay on, limping with 1 foot. You okay? Larson said. Define okay, I said. I'm in some madhouse of a not warehouse with demons and ghostly employees chasing me, and I literally just burned my foot on lava. I know it's a lot to process, he said, but we need to keep going. Focus on the job and save going crazy for later. I took a deep breath and immediately began coughing from the fumes. I hopped along, staying on the line as best I could. I was ecstatic when we turned the corner and left the lava behind. I nearly ran over Larson, who had stopped and was staring down the hallway. I was about to ask why he'd stopped when I saw for myself. At the end of the hall stood his doppelganger, and he wasn't alone. There were 5 of them. "What do we do?" I said quietly in his ear. He jumped at the sound of my voice so close. I don't know." I looked at my watch, and it said 8:51. "We only have 9 minutes," I said. "Just go straight at 'em." I ran ahead as fast as I could hobble. They came at me in a crowd. I fired and hit the first one in the knee, taking him out of the fight. I fired again, hitting another in the shoulder, then again hitting his knee. Foe Larson had fired his shotgun at me and thankfully missed, although I did feel a burning in my leg. I would worry about that later. Another shot, another Larson down. I was nearly halfway when his shot hit me in the shoulder. It erupted in pain, but I kept going, shooting down the last of his twins. I fired a shot at Larson and somehow hit him in the chest. He was wobbly but still raised his shotgun and aimed at me. We were close enough now I could tell he would hit me. Suddenly a blast came from behind me. It passed so close I could feel the heat from the buckshot. It hit him in the neck, and he stumbled back. I added my last round into his chest before he could pull the trigger again. He collapsed in a heap, his hand reaching out toward us as we stumbled past, through the door, and out into the main hall. I paused to catch my breath and leaned against the door, checking my watch. 8:58, I announced. We hobbled up to the reception door and stood silently, like 2 people waiting for an elevator. The daytime staff began arriving and punching in through the door, throwing furtive looks our way as they entered. The last one was the security guard for the day. "What the hell happened to you 2?" he said. We looked at each other and laughed as we punched in our numbers and walked out. He stood next to his car, and I stood next to mine. "Will I see you at work tonight?" he said. "Absolutely no way in hell," I said. He smiled and nodded. "Understandable." He got in his car and drove away. I took an extra moment to look around at the building, which looked completely normal from the outside. I breathed in the clean forest air and listened to the birds singing their merry, oblivious song. I got in my car slowly and gingerly, knowing there was no way I could afford to go to the hospital. I hoped I had some gauze and some antibiotic ointment at my dingy apartment. I started my car and hoped I had enough gas to make it home. Driving away from that building was the best feeling. I started wondering if there was any place around here that didn't have some strange rules to protect their weird secrets. I knew I would have to find a job and quickly. Maybe I could do fast food. There's no way anyone could have dark secrets in a burger joint, right?